A new review article reviews the scientific basis of the ketogenic diet, both the pros and cons, but again, kind of fails to be consistent and reaches some questionable conclusions. I'm Dr. Brett Scher, the medical director at dietdoctor.com, and I want to review the study recently published in Curious 2020 in a peer-reviewed medical journal. And on the one hand, you could say there's no such thing as bad publicity, right? Anytime we see very low-carb diets or keto diets in the literature, it's probably a good thing because it's getting more scientific curiosity and more scientific investigation. But what we see is, again, the evaluation can really break down because there's confusion about how to define the studies that you're looking at. So let's talk about this a little bit. And I wrote about this at dietdoctor.com, and you can see the full post there. But the study, it sort of starts off in the introduction talking about what a ketogenic diet is, but then it has a quote I want to read to you. Long-term side effects include hepatic steatosis, which is basically liver fat, kidney stones, hypoproteinemia, and vitamin deficiency. Okay, and the references for this? None, which is really unfortunate. Now, we have guides, evidence-based, heavily referenced guides on our site talking about how there is no clear evidence that ketogenic or very low-carb diets can cause kidney stones, and how there's actually evidence that it treats fatty liver. It doesn't cause fatty liver, but treats fatty liver. But here they are in this supposedly scientific review saying with no citations that it causes kidney stones and causes fatty liver. So to me, right away, that's troubling. But then they talk about lipids and low-carb diets, and they do a good job of reviewing the literature for increasing HDL and lowering triglycerides. And they also talk about how it can lower CRP and lower insulin and glucose. Those are all very well accepted. But then they focus on the few studies that show increased LDL, and they ignore the studies that show no rise in ApoB or no rise in LDL, which again, I find sort of problematic. And again, we have guides that show that detail the evidence behind low carb and your serum cholesterol, and how a majority of these studies and some systematic review of randomized controlled trials show no increase in LDL for the majority of people. Obviously, it can happen in some people, and we've covered that as well. But when you're reviewing the literature, it's important to acknowledge that a number of the studies show no change. So we have to understand that variability. But then this is where they get into trouble, because throughout the article, they say they're focusing on studies of very low carbohydrate diets, usually defined as less than 50 grams of carbs is how they define it here. But then all of a sudden they shift gears and they reference a study which defined low carb as less than 40% of your calories from carbs. And we've covered that before. That is nowhere near low carb and doesn't belong in any review of low carb diets. They also include the Diet Fit study, which is traditionally thought of as a low carb versus low fat study. And its conclusion was there was no difference in weight loss at the end of the year. But as I covered in my podcast with Lucia Aronica, this really wasn't a low carb diet because they started low carb, but by the end of the study, the low carb arm was eating 130 grams of carbohydrates because the way it was designed was to allow them to regulate their own carbohydrate intake without any restrictions. So that shouldn't be included either because that's not a low carb diet. And I guess that's my sort of underlying concern and my underlying message here, that a thorough scientific review of low-carb studies needs to stick to low-carb studies. And when I see reviews like this, it's a little disheartening because it can be so confusing for the average person who's not doing this type of detail to realize, oh, wait, these studies they're including aren't real low-carb studies. So I don't know, I guess that gives me more work to do, and I'm okay with that because this is what I want to help people understand, that we really need to be very vigilant and very strict about how we're defining these studies to make sure they apply to us if we are the type of people eating less than 50 grams of carbs or eating less than 20 grams of carbs, or if you're the type of person trying to decide if this diet is right for you, you need to make sure that the literature you're reviewing is pertinent to the diet you are thinking about partaking. So hopefully that's helpful. And I know for some people it can be very confusing. And we're here to try and cut through the confusion and help you cut through the confusion. So stay tuned for more of these videos. And of course, you can get the updates at our website at dietdoctor.com, where we try and add some clarity to all this to help you make the right decisions that you think are right for you and your health. Thanks a lot, everybody. Have a great day, and we'll see you next time.